Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Surbaugh. I'm Greg's wife. And on behalf of our family, I'd like to thank you for joining us as we remember and honor Ken Surbaugh, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a brother, an uncle, a neighbor, and a friend. Would you please join me as I pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for letting Ken be part of our lives and for giving us this time together to celebrate his life. Please bless us and bless this space as we remember a man who meant so much to all of us. We ask you to please be with Shirley as she begins a new phase without her life partner. We also ask that you be with Greg and CJ and Alex and the rest of us as we mourn the hole left in our lives by Ken's absence. Thank you for giving us life and others to love along the way. We ask all these things in your Son's name. Amen. Sorry, I forgot. I have more to do. Kenneth Owen Surbaugh, 94, of Roanoke, passed away on October 17th, 2022, at Roanoke Memorial Hospital. He was born on October 5th, 1928, in Meadow Creek, West Virginia, one of 10 children. He was preceded in death by his parents, John and Mary Elizabeth Surbaugh, and his siblings, Richard Surbaugh, Ralph Surbaugh, Chester Surbaugh, Virginia Hall, Joyce Lilly, Gloria Hara, and Mabel Surbaugh. Ken left school after the 11th grade to care for his widowed mother, but not before winning the highest math award for the state of West Virginia. During World War II, he spent a summer in Indiana, where he lived in a boarding house and worked in a ketchup factory while sending money home to his mother. Ken served in the U.S. Air Force from 1949 to 1952, spending 21 months in Korea as a radio operator and earning his GED. He then went to work as a telegraph operator for the C&O Railroad in Thurman, West Virginia, where he met Shirley McGuffin, his wife of nearly 67 years. After a stint with Smith's Transfer in Princeton, West Virginia, he went to work for IBM in 1961 and moved his family to Roanoke. He spent 29 successful years with IBM as a customer engineer, winning multiple awards for customer service and expertise. He was a client favorite due to that expertise, as well as his good humor and outgoing personality. Ken spent his later years enjoying his retirement, fishing, playing golf, working in his garden, visiting his buddies at the VFW, and enjoying his family and friends. He especially loves spending time with his son Greg and his grandchildren CJ and Alex. His and Shirley's cross-country trips to visit them in Missouri and Texas were legendary among their friends. Ken is survived by his wife, Shirley Surbaugh of Roanoke, his son Gregory Surbaugh and his wife Kathy of Roanoke, his grandsons CJ Surbaugh of Durham, North Carolina, and Alex Surbaugh of Denton, Texas, his brother Raymond Surbaugh of Raynell, West Virginia, and his half-brother Jackie Hume of North Bend, Oregon. Thank you.
So Dad liked some country music, and we were kicking around stuff that we thought could play might be appropriate, and this is a song that Alex actually picks the tunes, and we're going to ask that you would sing along. So the chorus is on the back of the bulletin, and this is Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And you have the back of the bulletin. Alex is going to sing the verses, and I'll ask you guys to sing along with the choruses. And it's okay. You can sit, you can stand, if you need to move around, whatever you like to do. But I'd like to hear you good and loud. Here we go.
I was standing by my window on a cold and cloudy day when I saw that there was nothing wrong
those of you who know Robbie Harris, you know I'm not Robbie Harris. Robbie came down with a little sickness today, so my name's Gary Yandel, and Greg and I grew up together in Roanoke since the 9th grade. So, long time we've been together, been friends, and I'm going to stand in for Robbie today. So, Psalm 121, I lift up my eyes to the hills, from where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shadow at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day nor by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going in and your coming out from time on and forever.
So that was some good singing. Good singing. Thanks, everyone, again for coming out. My name is Greg Surbaugh. I am related to Ken, as you can tell. So Kenneth Owen Surbaugh had many names. Mom and most of the McGuffin clan called him Surbaugh, just Surbaugh. They always have, and I don't really understand how that came to be, but that's the way it was. IBMers and many others called him Ken. He was dad to me, grandpa to my kids, and although I and most of my friends started calling him Ken too when we were teenagers, he didn't seem to mind. On the Surbaugh side of the family, he was Kenneth, or Uncle Kenneth. His golfing buddies nicknamed him Curly for his impressive lack of hair. At the VFW, he was 2 beers. And I say that he was also probably the only FDR Democrat in that bunch, and he wasn't afraid to let them know it. So with all those names and what we've heard in the obituary, you've seen it in the slideshow photos and on the table displays, it's easy to see that Dad, he cast a wide net. When a person lives the life Dad did over 94 years, lots of stories to tell. The last year, though, it was a journey. And there's a point where you know this day is coming. So I've had lots of time to reflect, and you're all here because in some way you're in those stories. As we heard, work for Dad started when he was in high school. He told stories about driving Everett Gwynn's truck to Georgia and picking up loads of peaches or watermelons and bringing them back to Meadow Creek to sell. And then there's a story about the ketchup factory. Honestly, I wasn't so sure about that one, but he knew the name of the town, Fowlerton, Indiana. So with help from Mr. Google, I learned that tiny town in the middle of nowhere, you might call it Meadow Creek of Indiana, about 6 blocks square between Fort Wayne and Indianapolis, had a ketchup factory until 1955. And I found a picture of one of the bottles, which you may have spotted in the slideshow. He claims they drank the hot ketchup right off the line with lunch. Said it was just like hot tomato juice. A big part of who Dad was came from his time and experiences in the Air Force. The story was that he was going to join with a buddy, but the buddy backed out and Dad went anyway. So in the Air Force, he had radio school, which taught him Morse code and electronics, and all that would pay off later. Growing up, I never knew anything about the whole GED story. I just thought he never finished high school. But in the Air Force, he asked to take the GED classes, but before they started, they told him to go ahead and take the test first, which he passed. So he got the GED. Excuse me, I got to blow my nose. So I found the letter, I found the test results the Air Force sent to the state of West Virginia, but he never got a diploma from them until, for whatever reason, he decided a few years ago he wanted a copy to prove it. He wrote some letters and they sent him one. I found it. Another big thing from the Air Force. This kid from Meadow Creek, Dad, left West Virginia and traveled across the country and to Korea and Japan. Now, I'm sure knowing Morse code helped him in becoming a telegraph operator on the railroad. And he did other jobs too. He sold tickets and I think he handled freight. But Dad got laid off from the railroad. Just like now, technology changed, workforces shrink, but he landed on his feet pretty quick over at Smith's Transfer. He said it was because he knew the shipping tariffs. But that job meant a move to Princeton, West Virginia, the first place I can remember living. Mom and Dad moved a lot. I can't remember how many moves equals a fire, my mom used to tell me. I don't really remember from who or how Dad learned about IBM. This was 1961, not exactly the start of the computer age, but there's more of the story. In fact, Bill Murdoch, the guy that hired Dad, and his first boss is here today. He was 32 years old at the time they were going to hire him, and that was, quote, too old. But Dad had scored really high on the entrance aptitude test. Bill thought it was the highest ever, and he thought Dad would be a good hire, and he went to bat for him, and Bill told me that he was able to get him in because the first day they interviewed him, he was under the age limit. What a big deal for us, for our family. But it started this adventure, Dad going away to schools in places like Endicott, New York. For the first one, Mom and I actually went back and stayed in Thurman with my grandparents while Dad was in school. And IBM stored our stuff, found us a rental house in Roanoke, down the street from Robbie Harris, to move into when the school was out. And a year later, Dad and Mom bought the house on Mapleton Avenue that we sold last year. So I turned 6, 2 days too late to start the first grade, which meant that I had to spend another year waiting for school to start. But wait, that was an opportunity. Mom and I went with Dad for a fun winter in Endicott, New York, while he was there for school. The hillbillies from West Virginia invaded New York and lived in the upstairs of an old house. It was such an adventure. It was cold. We watched a lot of TV. The house was so old and the floor so slanted, Dad joked you needed a seatbelt to sit on the toilet. I remember when Dad took us for haircuts and everyone there was speaking Italian. Young Greg couldn't figure that out. But we survived, and on a weekend visit to my uncle in Delaware, Mom finally was able to find pinto beans in the store instead of Great Northern beans. And for what I remember, my mom successfully introduced pinto beans to Endicott, New York. Dad had a great career with IBM. He started exactly the right time in 61, and he retired early at exactly the right time in 91. And when he retired, he took a slightly reduced pension so that Mom would keep getting it if he died first. An expression I heard a lot as a kid was IBM stood for I've been moved or I'll be moving. Dad avoided that. He wasn't really interested in promotions or being a manager or moving, away. He is perfectly happy carrying his tool bag and not sitting behind a desk. So if you look through the scrapbook out there and the table display, you saw the service awards and even cash he achieved through the years. But it wasn't an 8 to 5 job. He took calls and went out all hours of the day and night and weekends because those computers were running 24/7. Bill Murdoch and Dad both told the story of the time Bill called him on a Friday night. We had just arrived in Thurman, West Virginia for the weekend. No one's sure how Bill got that number. There was a machine at First National Bank and no one could get it fixed. Everyone was in a panic. Dad put us back in the car, drove the 4 hours back to Roanoke. He took a short nap in a chair, I think, showed up there on Saturday morning. Of course, he had it fixed and running by the afternoon. Throughout my life, Dad was just a guy who did stuff. He transformed the house on Mapleton. He built the basement rec room almost by himself. One summer, he went to West Virginia, sobered up his brother Chester, who was a master carpenter, and the two of them built the carport, including the brick wall themselves. When I was playing Little League, Williamson Road Rec Club, they wanted a snack bar at that field over there with behind Breckenridge. Could raise some money, buy uniforms. Dad took charge. He found a guy to do drawings. He pulled the permits. He took money, solicited money. He went around and scrounged and got suppliers to donate materials and then led the construction. Right now, if you go over there, there's a giant 2-story building and another one next door with the bathrooms. But if you walk up close and look carefully, you can see where they built around and onto that first little snack bar of Dad's. Dad worked hard, and he went above and beyond. But he was always there for every ball game, every school activity. And he encouraged me to do well in school, but work in the summers, doing all kinds of crazy jobs because he knew there were important lessons in them, not the least of which was to motivate me to go back to school and finish. Dad was just one of those guys. He could fix anything. Over the course of my childhood, we went to West Virginia, Thurman and Meadow Creek, both sets of parents, to visit grandparents and family about once a month, plus sometimes a couple weeks in Thurman in the summer. Usually when we walked in the door after hello, the first thing we'd hear is, "Surbaugh, did you bring your tools? I got something I need you to look at." A whole lot of that over the years of working on cars or anything else that had an engine. And so over the years, I was always hanging around with him, watching him, handing him tools, learning stuff. I'm a mechanical engineer because of him. I think I was 15 when he told me, he said, hey, you're going to start driving soon. We're going to have to find you an old car to work on, drive to school. A friend of mine had Corvairs and an old Falcon, and they fascinated me. And so I picked Corvair, and soon after we found that Corvair, a 63 convertible, probably the stupidest choice you could make in the world. But hey, he'd had one for a while. He bought it from my cousin as a work car. He didn't keep him long. I remember him driving into Howell's gas station on Williamson Road and telling the guy, fill her up with oil and check the gas. Of course, my old Corvair barely ran, and Dad drove it straight back to the backyard, and we put it up on ramps, the engine soon to be pulled out. Dad found a shop manual. We jumped in, and this was the beginning of a years-long adventure of rebuilding engines and fixing stuff and turning that old Corvair into a gem. I drove it for 9 years, and the stupidest thing I ever did was sell it. Now, I've got another Corvair, a 64 convertible. It was a barn car, and all the time I've spent working on it, and whenever I drive it, I think of Dad. When I cleaned out the shop building a couple of years ago, I found Corvair tools and some parts in Dad's workbench. Over the years, he gave me lots of those cool little IBM special tools that make working on stuff so much easier. They're still in my toolbox, and they're my most prized possessions. Dad was fortunate to retire early and enjoy it, and you can see from the pictures in the gallery, golf and fishing and grandkids and trips to West Virginia for reunions of all sorts. You know, there's a whole bunch of pictures of Dad and brothers, his brothers. Thurman reunion, C&O Railroad reunion, Sandstone High School reunion, Bennett family reunions. I was lucky enough to retire myself after 35 years of engineering and construction. Over the last 10 years of my career, I had the opportunity to work in the field and mentor many young engineers. My advice to them, do good work and never forget it's all about relationships. And I realize now that I was just doing what my dad taught me to do. It's key to success. He also taught me lots of fun, good old boy expressions, like, if it moves, oil it, and if it don't, paint it with a hammer. He'd always greet Gary and Bart when they walked in the door with, you boys from around here are working on the sawmill. And when they left, it was, right if you find work, and many more, than some of which I can't repeat. He liked being around people. He never met a stranger, and he tried to do what was right and treat people right. He usually got along with everyone, except for those rare few he described as the north end of a southbound horse. Dad was a good guy and a good dad, and he lived a good long life, almost a century long. Although the last 15 months were tough, his spirit was strong to the end, and no matter what happened or what was going on through all that thing, his only concern was Mom. In all the decisions we made, the first thing we would say is, if Mom's good with it, I'll be good with it. So I'm a little sad today, but happy to share these stories with you. And I'm really proud to be the son of Kenneth and Surbaugh.
Hello, my name is Alexander Kenneth Surbaugh. I'm named after both of my grandfathers, so I've thought often throughout my life about what those names mean and what holding out that legacy myself could mean. And to paraphrase Lincoln, history will little note nor long remember what we say here today, but I hope that I can say something meaningful for all of you, and that that memory carries on with each of us. So to give you an idea of who my grandfather was, he was always very sure of where he came from. Even to us, he always described himself as an old hillbilly. He was a man of computers. He was very intelligent, math whiz, but he considered himself a West Virginian and a hillbilly. He always spoke with a West Virginian accent, which, like, as you age and move other places, accents can change and morph, but I am fairly certain, although I didn't know him as long as others, that he spoke the same way he did the day he was born. He was not exactly humble, I don't think. He once apparently said, "It's not bragging if you can do it." But he was always very sure of those abilities, and he would let you know what he did and didn't know. He was not a braggart in that he didn't tell you things that he couldn't do, and he would tell you the limits of those abilities, which is something that I admire in him. And he was always curious. He embraced new things, tried to learn about new technologies, and he always encouraged that in us as little kids running around in their basement or out in the shed. If we would find old things and ask about them, he would always tell us what they were. He would tell us how they worked. He knew how almost any machine that he had worked, and he would explain it to us. He once told us a story that he told often about explaining to the Roanoke School District how a computer does math, because they changed the way the math curriculum was taught and claimed it was how computers did it. And he was so taken aback by that, he went outside to the Pontiac and grabbed the computer manual, excuse me, it might have been a Buick, I don't know. Anyway, and brought back the IBM manual and then read to them exactly how a computer does math, because he was not going to let that go into the notes without alteration. But I think, as we all know, the most defining characteristic of Ken was his kindness. He loved more than anything else to see us happy. Their sole thought was us advancing in life. I know that he was very proud to see us graduate college. He saw CJ graduate, and they unfortunately could not be at my graduation, but his name, Kenneth Surbaugh, is still there on my diploma on my wall. And to give you an example of the depth of that kindness, one time when we were too old for mall kiddie rides, we were walking through around some Christmas, and he saw a family getting on one and tried to offer them $1 to make it run, not out of pity or anything, but because the thought of those kids enjoying themselves on that merry-go-round brought him such joy that he wanted to do that for them. So I mean, that's the kind of man he was. I'm very proud to be his grandson. I hope that I can hold up to carrying on that name myself, and I hope that I've done him some justice here today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm CJ Surbaugh. I'm his oldest grandchild, and you'll have to excuse me, I've always been a manuscript preacher, so I've got it all written out. And as I was preparing what to say today, I tried to think of a really exciting story to tell about Grandpa, as you've heard so many exciting stories from my dad. But I realized that none of my stories were really all of that gripping. They're just stories about Grandpa taking us fishing or playing with us at the Science Museum in Roanoke. They're stories about how much we delighted in each other's company. What made all those times special, the fishing trips, the time we went out on Raymond's pontoon boat, all of those times were special because Grandpa told us about his own childhood, which was so different from me and Alex's. And so I wanted to tell you some of those stories. One of my favorite memories with Grandpa was when he took us to visit Meadow Creek and see the house he grew up in. Grandpa told us about swimming in a quiet spot in the river and watching out for snapping turtles. He told us about how he would crawl underneath the pump organ at a local church and use his hands to pump the pedals because one of his sisters could play, but she wasn't yet tall enough to reach the pedals herself. He also told us about standing in the back of the local Pentecostal church because they had the best music, and he swore up and down that he left when they started handling snakes, but I'm not sure I believe him. When I got older, Grandpa told me that when coal trains stopped in Meadow Creek to refill the water for their steam engines, he and his brothers would sneak on and start throwing the coal off the top into the ditch, and after the trains left, they came back with wheelbarrows and carted the coal home to heat the house. Some of the stories he told us were dubious, although apparently that one's true, but I still love to hear them. One summer when I was visiting, Grandpa told me that when he was around 10, his brother Chester took him along to check on the still he had up the mountain, and the sheriff came up after them, and he never really did tell me the end of that story. But Grandpa also loved sharing his work and his favorite hobbies with Alex and I. He took us fishing at Carvin's Cove and in West Virginia, and he told us about the largest fish he'd ever caught. He would take us with him to visit his sister Glore in Beckley. And while we were there, while we drove, he pointed out names of towns he'd worked in with the railroad and with IBM. And while we were in Beckley, he would take us to the exhibition coal mine. And he told us how he went down the mines exactly once with one of his brothers and was so scared by the sound of the splinters breaking off the support beams from the mine that he never went back. He went up and joined the Air Force, I think. He loved to tell us all about the odd jobs he had before IBM. Driving a watermelon truck and working in a ketchup factory among them. And he was very proud of getting the job at IBM in 1961. And in the last few years, I heard that story and Bill Murdoch's name many, many times. All of my favorite memories of Grandpa start with him saying, well, you know, and then going on to tell us something slightly hard to believe that made for a very good story. And one of the last times I saw Grandpa before he got sick, we went to the VFW, and I finally met all the people that he talked about and who it turned out he had been telling stories to about me and Alex and Dad. And he drank a Kurz and told me a story I'd never heard before about his own father dying when Grandpa was just a little boy. He always had something new to tell us, and I will miss learning new things about Grandpa. He's the reason I love telling stories and hearing them. He's the reason Alex and I love West Virginia and its history. And he's the reason we can bait a hook and cast a line. Grandpa loved Alex and I so much, and he was so proud of us. Sorry, excuse me. It was a privilege and a blessing to be his grandchild and to get to hear every story that he had to share. Thank you.
Driving when it got dark, and I'd be laying in the back, and Dad would always turn the radio on and find WSM, that clear channel out of Nashville. But in 1966, he bought a new Dodge Coronet, and it had a rear speaker. So from then on, he would make sure on those trips that he knew I was a rock and roll guy, and he would serenade me with the clear channel out of Nashville and the Grand Ole Opry. And so Alex found a great song. It's a Flat and Scruggs song, and we kind of changed it a little bit. And we're going to honor Dad with a little bit of bluegrass. And I think that would be a great way to end the service. What do you think? Ready? There's a well-being path on that old mountainside where I wandered when I was a lad. But I wandered alone to the place I call home in those Blue Ridge hills far away. Oh, I love those hills of West Virginia. From those Blue Ridge hills I did roll. When I die, won't you bury me on the mountain far away near my Blue Ridge mountain home? Now my thoughts going back to that ramshackle shack in those Blue Ridge hills far away, where my mother and dad were laid there to rest. They are sleeping in peace together there. Oh, I love those hills of West Virginia. From those Blue Ridge hills I did roll. When I die, won't you bury me on the mountain far away near my Blue Ridge mountain home?
Oh, I didn't know that. But Dad said, that's a lie. He's not your dad. He's standing right on there for the other.